Today's guest has made gaming his main focus and is well recognized as one of the faces and voices of competitive Flesh and Blood. That's right, today I'm honored and excited to be joined by Matt DeMarco, aka Flake. I'm asking him about his history, how he's gotten to where he is, and for any advice to someone who wants to follow a similar path. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dice Commando and a very special Go Again, a Fabulous cast. Now for most of us, gaming and Flesh and Blood is our hobby, something we do between work and life stuff. But today's guest has taken it to the next level. Matt, how are you, sir?
I'm well. It is Super Bowl Sunday.
That's right.
And as a proud Canadian, it hits different here, but I guess I'm excited, supposedly, possibly, maybe, little.
At the very least, we should get to see some pretty sweet movie trailers today, right? So.
Oh, yeah, no, well, like, in all honesty, frankly, usually this is where, exactly, like, some random trailer for something that I'll get excited about drops, but we're, like, a few days removed from Picard Season 3, and that, for me, is basically the holiday I'm waiting for. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I'm halfway through season 2 on that, right before, or I guess in the middle of all of the guest appearances, right? The slew of guest appearances. So I do have to give a shout out, because we were doing this on Super Bowl Sunday, to one of our, to Matt, not this Matt, to a different Matt, one of our team members. He is expecting their child, and he's a Philly fan, so he's relatively certain the baby's going to come like halfway through the game. That's so best of luck to you, buddy. So the majority of people watching this will already know who you are, but if you could just real quick give us a summary, you know, who are you? What do you do? What's your shtick?
Well, a shtick is a fascinating way to put it. I guess it's just my personality. I am one of the casters for Flesh and Blood's premier event circuit, things like Worlds, Nationals, Pro Tours, things like that. I also have a podcast called Instant Speed Podcast, and that's it. I mean, it's hard because when I explain it to my parents, they still don't get it. It's been years that I've been doing this, and ultimately, it's funny because when I hear my parents on the phone speak, like when I'm visiting them and they're on the phone with somebody, like, oh, you know, Matt's here and blah blah blah. Oh, what does he do? Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure. And I just say, I'm like, Ma, I'm on, like, just call it internet radio. Just say that. We'll just say that, and that's good enough. So I do internet radio.
He's a YouTube star, kids, or a podcast
star.
Oh,
I wouldn't put it that way. That's trust me. You don't eat this much amount of ramen and consider yourself a star. That's not how it goes.
Well, actually, that's a good one. We'll put a pin in the ramen thing, but. So first off, you did mention we are shooting this on Super Bowl Sunday morning. So who do you like today? Or do
All right,
you care?
I have it on good, reliable sources. You know, like I'm well connected. You know, being a Fab celebrity, I know I got all the people on my Rolodex, and I have it on very good authority that
the Kansas City Chiefs
will win.
I think that's
guaranteed.
I think that's a pretty good bet. So you want to put any money on that?
Not only that, parlay that with the fact that the score is going to
38-35.
Easily. I would mortgage all your houses and do this.
Well, I've got those written down, and we will see how that lands. So best of luck with all of your putting all of your ramen on the line for this one.
All of it.
All right. So yeah, today I wanted to really talk about your background, how you got to where you are, because there are many young or maybe young at heart gamers out there who would really love to be where you are. So I'm really curious to hear your story, your background, and really ultimately how you became involved in doing what you're doing.
Okay. If we're going to get deep into the weeds on this is just it goes very far back to high school. In high school, I was voted. During graduation, I was voted most likely to have their own talk show, which was interesting. And after that, through university and college, I was doing, I did sports journalism. So I wrote for my university paper. I had a sports column in that paper. I also did radio in college. I got an internship in what is in TSN radio here in Canada, which is the equivalent of like ESPN radio. I was interning there and had some airtime there briefly. And ultimately that was coupled with, I was doing some like amateur comedy. And then I went to, I started bartending like performance style bartending, like flair bartending, like bottle juggling and stuff like that. I did that for a few years. And ultimately, it just sort of culminated with the fact that I really liked entertaining people. I really liked being an entertainer in that regard. And it was fun. And the problem is like at the time, I was in school and doing all this other stuff. And eventually you just realize that being broke and tired is not the way to go. And that was sort of, I had to divert and get a quote unquote real job. I moved out to Toronto, got like corporate desk office space style job. And I was so lonely in Toronto that in the evenings, I would play video games and mostly card games and stuff. And somebody suggested, you know what, if you're feeling lonely, like maybe you should give streaming a shot. And I did. And it was, very rocky, as anybody who's streaming or anybody who gets into content would attest to. It's a tough start. But eventually, I found a game called Gwent. I got a following there. And I created a tournament series in North America that happened in Philadelphia once or twice. And that's how, and I did the broadcast alongside two colleagues of mine, Mark Gibson and Mike Torek, and we did that. And that's how I got noticed by CDPR, and that's how I got my first audition. But it may seem very linear. It's like, okay, you wanted to do it, you streamed, you made a tournament, you got a job. But what people don't realize is within that span was about 2 years and about 2,000 to 2,500 hours of content that I had created without a dime being seen, that I did in my spare time after work from like 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. every night. So it's a very, romantic kind of view of, nerd sees it, wants it, gets it, but there's incredible amounts of doubt and toil in between.
Interesting. So how does that, so moving into like a new card game, right? Let's say you want to go move into something else beyond Flesh and Blood tomorrow. Do you have like an effective portfolio, or is it just, I know a guy, or how's that work?
Well, networking is definitely part of it. It's to say that, getting jobs and hearing about opportunities is something, there's no newsletter you get. There's no ads or want ads. Oftentimes you are as good as your reputation, and that is your currency. That is what you bring to the table. Your body of work is one thing, but if you're an asshole, nobody's going to want to do anything with you. That's the fact of the matter. There are no divas in the industry that do not get immediately eviscerated and cut out of the business. It's cutthroat, but at the same time, people want to deal with decent people. I have a portfolio in the sense that I have, this list of major tournaments that I've been involved with that have been viewed by tens of hundreds of thousands of people and whatnot. But the reality is that portfolio, that highlight reel, that package of work that I have doesn't necessarily translate. The reason why I got out of traditional radio and broadcasting and kind of abandoned it for as long as I did was because the writing was on the wall. It didn't matter how good I was at something. If there was somebody who was there longer and had more connections and was more buddy-buddy, that's just the way it goes. The same people that I grew up listening to on the radio when I was in kindergarten are still on the radio 30 some odd years later. Opportunities in that domain are like there's these gigantic waves of turnover, but they occur like every 30 to 40 years, barring some scandal where somebody gets fired. The opportunities are minimal. And when I seek these opportunities out, I present to them my body of work, my demo tape, my reel. And I do this every year. My dream job is still sports journalism. I would love to work in that field and be, a sports desk announcer style person. The problem is that all those networks and all those entities that make those decisions do not view esports and online broadcasting as legit. And that is a challenge that I'm still fighting for. And part of overcoming that is networking, is having people with higher stature trust what you are and then you could leverage your reputation with them to convince others, and that's where you can kind of pivot and transition into a whole other lane. Because the silly part about this business is that whether you're broadcasting in front of 100,000 people on Twitch or on Channel 7, it's you're going in the same direction, but you're on two different highways, and you can't merge onto the other one because they won't let you. That's just the reality of it.
Interesting. One would have to think that'll shift at some point with online content. Maybe it'll take 30 years for the old guard to die or whatever, but interesting. Right, so in the process of scheduling this interview with you, it actually blew me away. It was pretty clear that your schedule is pretty insane. So any of us can face burnout in anything we do, our job or whatever. So how do you approach your streaming, your traveling, your events and such to avoid that burnout in this field?
Oh boy. So the burnout it's real. It's you feel it. You could have the right mentality approaching it. You can have that drive and that fire burning, but if the parts are worn down and not greased, like you ain't going anywhere. That's the reality of it. My body is usually what is the most punished by all this, but I'm always rearing and ready to go, and that's because there's a foundation of passion for this industry, for what I do, and the terms of like my schedule being crazy, like people see me once a week on Instant Speed podcast, or they'll see me once every couple months on a major tournament broadcast, and then they'll think that my entire life is just sitting on the couch watching Clone Wars. Like, I wish that was what it was. Like, I would love that. But the reality is that I work about 10 hours a day to keep maintaining connections, streaming, trying to remain relevant, creating content, editing, recording, guesting on podcasts, which is something I absolutely enjoy doing. And if I travel, then it's okay. That's 3 or 4 days out of my life that I need to account for. And but I'll do it every single time. This is something that I truly love doing. The burnout for me is more physical when it's been, there was like a stretch of time between like I think it was like the end of September and the beginning of December where I think I was traveling 7 weekends and exactly, and like by the end of it, you don't know whether you're coming or going, and going through customs is always exciting because I have the Global Nexus entry pass or whatever, the fast track through customs and security, and they don't ask you much questions. They literally just ask you where you're coming from, and like they scan your eyes or something, and then you just go through and you give them the slip, and they're like, all right, where are you coming from? And like coming home from Indianapolis, I was like, I had to stop and be like, I'm like, this looks really suspicious, but I have no idea. I'm like, Chicago? I'm like, Indianapolis, that's it. And she looks at me. I'm like, it's been a long few months, like, please. And so that was the kind of, it's more mental burnout. Sorry, it's not mental burnout. It's like you come to these headways where your body is just so tired and your brain is just on fire with things, but it's the passion that gets you going. Like, if I didn't love this game, man, I would just be completely content just sitting on my couch, like I said, watching Clone Wars.
Yeah, well, I do love the Clone Wars. I do love the Clone Wars. So actually, you bring up an interesting part about the physical, right? So I work out most days. Used to be every day, but then I had a kid, right? But I work out most days to stay, and it helps stay energized, right? And in the past, when I've had to do traveling, it's zero chance that I work out when I'm traveling, right? So how have you been able to balance that with everything?
It's not easy at all. Oftentimes, the health or the maintaining health aspect of traveling for working and whatever, like if I'm traveling for work and there's an event, a 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like I'm at the event at like 8 o'clock or 8 or 9 a.m. I don't leave until right after the last round is done, and sometimes that's 7, 8, 9 p.m. So I'm there for 10 to 12 hours, and then in that time I don't have time to really eat, or like you might get a little bit of time to just scarf something down in between, but for that period of 10 or 12 hours, my nutrition is coffee and peanut M&Ms, and like that's like basically what gets me going. So, but I'm not really eating much. Like I'm within that whole day, I'm maybe getting about 500 calories in me, and at the end of the day, you're so tired that you don't even want to go out to dinner. You just go to your hotel room, a handful of trail mix, and then just pass out. The working out aspect, I used to do that a lot more when I had that office job. I hated it so much that there was a gym in the office, and I would rather be in the gym I would be in there for about an hour to 90 minutes every single day because I just didn't want to be at my desk. And I got in the best shape of my life because I hated my job. It was such a weird trade-off. But I mean, when you're traveling, it's difficult because the schedule you don't know what's around you, and you don't want to pack all your extra stuff to go to the gym because you're usually just completely exhausted. So, and at home, man, it's like my rule is if I want to make a coffee, I have to do 40 push-ups. That's my rule, and I drink a lot of coffee. So that's how I basically stay in shape, is taking the stairs in my apartment building. I take a 1 mile walk every day, and then the push-up rule. That's basically it. It's not a good one at all.
Well, and we would be remiss. You mentioned your 500 calorie limit on tournaments, but we would be remiss to not talk about the 400 calories you ate in 19 and a half seconds or whatever it was with the Crew Lair challenge.
Yes. I think that we even put a calories per hour. I think we kind of did the math on that. That whole challenge was exciting, and I would have won it if I was not made to laugh during it, because laughing is an outward motion, and I was all about an inward kind of strategy. So I could have done it in under 20 seconds. It was like 22, but there was a 2-second kind of hiccup because Armada made me laugh.
I do. Shout out to DM Armada. I really do enjoy his stuff, and I've never met him in person. I know you have, and his voice as smooth in person as it is on the microphone?
Oh, it is, and his cadence and his tempo and everything. You could tell he's a music teacher because the way that he speaks is so melodic. It's entrancing. That's why we make us such a great pairing, because when I'm off the rails talking about nonsense, he can bring people back, like, this Pied Piper with his beautiful voice, just realigning everybody and getting them all on the right track.
Nicely done. Well, so you mentioned something in that last, and let me just ask this, right? They say that, do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, right? But the reality is that once your hobby becomes your job, it's no longer your hobby, right? We often see this with LGS owners. They're like, oh my God, I'm going to be an LGS owner and play card games all day. And then they're like, I just want to go home at 9 o'clock, right? So how have you been able to, as someone who's basically made his career, how have you been able to handle that and make it still fun for you?
That's one aspect that scared me big time, was if I'm going to dive into this full on, what am I going to do for recreation? How am I going to, balance the stress and stuff with, where's that counteraction? The beauty of it is I absolutely freaking love what I do. And, I've been on enough dating apps where you get asked that question, oh, so what do you do for fun? Like, first thing they ask is, what do you do? Or what's your job? And I explain it, and it's always an interesting conversation. And when they ask me, well, what do you do for fun? I'm like, the same thing. I still play cards. I still talk about cards. I still hang out. That was a real big realization to me when I knew I was on the right track of doing something that I should really invest my whole heart and soul into, was because I never felt like it was work. And you're absolutely right about that. And I know, trust me, I know that this is a reality and a privilege that very few get to truly enjoy. And there's nothing wrong with people working jobs so that they can afford everything after that and enjoy their lives after that. That's a means to an end, and I respect it, and that's fine. I did that for so long, but to me, this is what I wanted to do forever, and that's kind of the beauty of it. It's like, what do I do for fun? I play cards. My downtime is when I'm physically exhausted and sit on the couch and put on, a Disney Plus or whatever. That's my, there's no for fun. It's just for rest, because everything I do for me really lights a fire under my ass. And if people challenge that, well, I gave up a really lucrative office career for a fraction of the income, but infinite more fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's pretty awesome. I still do the grind every day. Many other people do. So It's good to get that perspective.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Is like that's not criticism at all, at all, at all, at all. Because the difference is that, for example, for me in the job that I was at prior to this, I was working my ass off, making good money, but everything after that did not even come close to negating the stress and the anxiety and whatever. But for a lot of people, they may work a job that they're not necessarily like super passionate about, but it affords them so much more joy afterwards because, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just was in a situation where the trade-off was not a fair one. It wasn't a fair, equation there. It was not equitable. And I had to make a change for my mental health, for my own, my own well-being. I had to sort of make that shift.
Well, and I think that, again, everybody's situation is different, but I applaud that because it takes confidence. It takes balls to do that, right? So, all right, so I'm going to shift topics a little bit. We're going to talk about Flesh and Blood and kind of your thoughts about the current state and the future. And I think you and I can have a unique conversation because, at least from stuff I've seen, you and I have shared many, many dead games or still pseudo-going games, whatever we want to call them, to not offend anybody over our careers, right? And at the risk of member berries, right? The old Decipher game, I know that was one of your passions, right? I used to play that as well.
They made great games. Decipher was so good.
So I'm curious, what is it about Flesh and Blood that seems different? Is it simply the company or the people behind it, or is the game itself, what is it?
It's so many different pieces that become greater than the sum of their parts. Let's go down a quick laundry list. Like the company and the people, they care. They are people who are very passionate about the game and wanting to, maintain a game that is, how do I put this? That it's true to the spirit of what it is. Card games eventually they kind of get bastardized down the road, and I think that there's a certain aspect of respect that LSS development and LSS themselves have for what a card game should be, and they care about not just putting out a product that is desirable, but putting out a good product that becomes desirable. And that's the whole spirit of what LSS is something that is pretty important to the success of the game itself. The rules of the game, I feel, on first glance, I was not necessarily a big fan of because it seemed like just like a reimagining of, okay, well, instead of creatures, you have attacks, and instead of there's 2 life totals. It's just like, it was kind of didn't seem like, I wouldn't call it a Magic reskin, but it was something that was very similar, and I was tired of the whole 2 life total type card games. I wanted something different. That's why I really liked Gwent for so long, because it was incredibly unique. But I think they just nailed a bunch of things very right. Like the resource system is, one of the best ever in any card game. I would say that the Twilight system in Lord of the Rings had it almost spot on. I think that was the best resource system. Flesh and Blood, I think, is great as well. I just think in general, the way that they came out of the gate, being very communicative, being very, tournament centric, and giving people access to their thoughts and baubles about the direction of the game, having someone like James who would regularly go on podcasts to discuss the future and being very candid with that approach, taking questions honestly, not shying away from things. There was a lot of passion and a lot of integrity in there, and I think that translates. What I do worry about is if the game is outgrowing their capabilities to curate it, I don't want to say adequately, but keep up with the growth. Mm-hmm. There's a certain level of concern wherein at a certain point, like the game has been exponentially growing, yet have you been able to keep up? And that is a genuine concern that I have, not because I don't doubt their capabilities of running the company, but more so because I worry that it might just outpace them to the degree that they just can't catch up anymore. There was a Deloitte article that came out recently where, LSS was kind of puffing their chests about nearly 6,500% revenue growth over the past 3 years. 6,500% revenue growth. Like that means the game's doing well, and it means that it's growing, but can they keep up? This is, I think, in my opinion, the most pivotal year for the success of the game, because if they bungle 2023, the meta's already not necessarily something that everybody's too keen on. Yeah, there's new products coming out, but you can't have 3 strikes and you're out kind of such situation. Like if Baltimore becomes a complete fumble, like who knows? You cannot mess up 2023 and then go around saying, look how much money we made, because that kind of charm, that kind of free pass has expired. Like the charm of LSS being the indie company. You're not an indie company anymore, bucko. So that's the danger of that. But I think so far LSS has really demonstrated that they give a S about it. They do care. And I don't doubt their passion, and I don't doubt their mission to give players the right game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the 6,500 revenue growth. I didn't know that number, but that's not sustainable, right? I mean, if somebody freaks out next year because they only grow by 100%, that doesn't mean that the company's in a bad spot either, right?
Yeah, you doubled your revenue. If your revenue's increased by 100%, you've doubled your revenue. That's incredible. That is good for you. You've earned a raise, like in a promotion. Amazing. 6,500%. Now I understand that in 2019 those numbers were small, but it's still the fact that they have done nothing but grow like weeds, and that's incredible.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you have a good lead in there, because I did want to ask you kind of an off-script question about, the meta. I mean, I think for those of us who are very into it, we know that we're very close to one of the best metas in any card games, right? But when we saw, what was it? It was Leeds, right? And then we saw Indy. It was a wall of ice in the top 8. So how does the perception, or how do you think that perception flows with people looking outside the game, maybe looking to come in? If that question makes sense, right? Like I said, I think most of us think that, ice is maybe a problem, but it's pretty close to being wide open. But if you're outside looking in, how does that translate, do you think?
So just from an objective point of view, if you were to look at the meta and say that ice isn't a problem, then you are absolutely kind of hopped up on the copium. It's the realness, right? The fact is that you don't have to look far to notice that the top 8s are dominated of the major tournaments. We've seen PQs all over the place where we had 8 different heroes in the PQ, and so many different heroes have won the PQs. No offense, PQs are kind of small potatoes. It's the reality. Winning one is not easy, don't get me wrong, but you cannot extrapolate in data from a PQ and think that it's the top end of competitive Flesh and Blood. That isn't to say that other heroes aren't strong, but Ice is inherently the best ability in the game for disruption and whatnot. Flesh and Blood's very much about executing a plan, and in order to formulate that plan, usually it's while absorbing your opponent's wrath and taking damage on their side. You need to evaluate your cards, formulate a plan. If your plan is so precise that you need every single resources and every little domino to line up perfectly, the second that one of your opponents is able to ice react you or just jam a frostbite on the board, that ruins everything. And I understand that's a feels bad, an absolute feels bad. Disruption in this game is incredibly strong. People think that Pummel is like an OP card, and kind of to a degree it is. It's very, very strong disruptive effect. Why is Command and Conquer so expensive? Because it busts up your arsenal. Like any kind of disruption type effects are so strong in this game. So Ice is certainly an issue, but there's also an issue with the fact that a lot of the community is not exactly doing much to try to disrupt it. And I'm not saying that it's up to the community to solve an OP problem, but it kind of is to a degree. And while these bans and restrictions are going down, you have to understand that they need time to gestate before things can kind of resolve themselves. Do I believe that these bans are the right answer? Well, I mean, the information's out there. Ice is still super strong. Ice is still crushing it. So not every ban and restriction announcement is this sniper shot that gets you right between the eyes. Sometimes it misses. Sometimes it's a glancing blow off the shoulder. And you never know. Like, is that enough damage? Did I fix it? You don't know. You don't know if you solve the issue. I don't think that this is the right ban. I think that there's more coming, but at the same time, like the community needs to stop bitching and whining about this kind of stuff without trying to understand that there are methods to deal with it, and there will always be the strongest deck. That's just the reality of it. There will always be the strongest deck, because if you solve the ice problem and suddenly, I don't know, I'm just making this up. Suddenly Rhinar becomes the strongest thing, and then the next top 8 is 6 Rhinars. Well, who's going to start? What's the next thing? People are going to start complaining about that. Ice is a problem. It is. But at the same time, there are ways to learn around it. There are ways to play around it. And if you're just upset because your deck is bad against ice, well, change decks. It's the reality of it. Or switch heroes. Or play ice. Capitalize on something that's strong. Learn how to beat it. Play it. I don't like that ice is super strong, but at the same time, I don't like aggro. To me, aggro is boring. So everybody has their opinion, and that's what it has to remain, a subjective, feeling towards what the meta is and how the heroes are currently strengthened and how they're weighted.
Well, don't forget, the things that gamers hate the most are change and the way things are, right? So.
Yeah. If you can find the happy medium between that. Exactly.
Go. All right, well, before I hit you up with the last closing question, did you have anything for me or any other thoughts you wanted to throw out there?
Oh, honestly, I'm like, usually I'm the one asking questions and all the stuff. So it's very fascinating to be on this end of it. And I guess, my question is just, my question to other kind of content creators and such in the space is, is how do you feel about how, like, what the community is in terms of, like, I wish I had more time to sort of think this through, because this is kind of on the spot. I missed this part of the script, but a lot of people evaluate the community early on and say it's like super wholesome and say it's super awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But those kinds of things kind of eventually erode away over time, and more people you add to it. What's your current assessment of the strength of the community and how they're leaning? Because it used to be a year ago or so, like Tales of Aria comes out and LSS is the greatest company in the world and it's the greatest community in the world, and there wasn't a sniff of toxic air, and that those kinds of things eventually appear. So what would be your kind of assessment of where we're at with that?
Yeah, well, we'll start the clock so I don't go for an hour. No, I'm kidding. But well, let me just say it this way, right? When Flesh and Blood, because I've been in Flesh and Blood since day one. I was very fortunate to get in early. And I agree that the community, by and large, was great. And I feel that that's because of the Flesh and Blood was attracting, I think, a lot of outcasts from other games, right? No pun intended, outsiders and all that, right? But I think what became very important over the next maybe year and a half to a lot of players who were in it from the beginning or were coming in was, we want to make this different than Magic. But then I feel that Flesh and Blood has always had to measure themselves against Magic, right? And they're like, well, we want this to be different, but Magic's doing this. Why aren't you doing this, right? Or in many cases, Magic's doing this. I'm happy you're not doing that. Fair enough. But I think it's that double bar that we hold ourselves as a community to, LSS to, and so on, where, like I said, again, we want it to be different, but then we're like, well, how come we're not doing things the same way, right? So, and that's not hard and fast, right? There are certainly, yeses and nos on that, but that's something that has me concerned. And, I think as you were maybe alluding to, or at least as I was interpreting it, like, as the community's grown, we've changed, right? And I don't think we're I still think that we are a great community in that those elements are still there, but we're attracting we're attracting the smelly dude from Magic now, right? There are those people, right? So, or other games. I'm not taking just pot shots of Magic. So, right. What do you think on that?
Well, I think that it's just that, like, the more variables you add to the equation, eventually things are not going to add up, and there's going to be, it kind of starts to crumble to the degree that you'll have people who will just draw lines in the sand about certain things and this and that. And it's the natural progression of things. The more people you add to a room, the less they'll be in a full agreement on things. Like, it's just more personalities and more conflicting viewpoints on some matters. It just, the way I kind of have always explained it to people is, the negative part of the internet may be 10% of the voice, but it's usually at 200% of the volume. That's just the reality of it. You'll always hear the negative opinion because the happy people are just out there enjoying the stuff. So it's usually the vocal aspect of things are oftentimes the negative stuff. Oh,
go ahead. Sorry. Yep.
No. That you can go.
Well, so I was going to say, I agree with you, and I think that as the community's grown, that 10%, that 1%, whatever you want to call it, it's easier for them to find buddies, right? So it used to be just like, oh, Matt, he's on his tirade again, right? Let's ignore him. But now Matt and Andrew found each other, and we can feed off of each other, and the negativity really starts growing as more people come into the community, right? So just rule of numbers.
Yeah, and that's the aspect. Like, I'm always trying to promote like positivity as much as possible, but at the same time, being honest about things is also what part of being, part of maintaining integrity is all about. I mentioned it earlier. Reputation is your number one currency, and I challenge anyone to say that I'm not an honest person when I talk about things, to the dismay of some and to the appreciation of others. It's just the reality of it. I'm not going to shy away from something I feel strongly about, and that is just me. There's tens of thousands of other people in the community who feel just as strongly about the things that they want to say. And at certain points, those are going to conflict, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think the important part is that there needs to be some sort of maintained, I wouldn't call it etiquette, but just basic decent human decency when you're kind of engaging in these conversations that are coming from two different conflicting viewpoints. It's just it's where that impact occurs and what happens in that impact and how that friction is generated. That's what's important. It's okay to disagree, but it's how you disagree that really maintains or demonstrates who you are as a person. Because I know that there's a lot of people out there who I disagree with their views, but I'm friends with them because they have a lot of other redeeming qualities. And the way that we express our disagreements is respectful. And I respect that. You can, I'm not saying I'm right about everything, but at the same time, sometimes it's just, you can disagree like a decent human being, and that's a good thing.
Excuse me, sir, this is the internet.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, exactly. One of my favorite quotes I think I ever heard is like, the greatest invention of all time will be when somebody invents a device where you could punch someone through the internet. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that would sell out in a heartbeat. Like, that would be the greatest thing since the invention of the internet.
Why would you buy that?
I'm just saying, there's a lot of people out there who feel like that's the way that things are eventually going, where disagreement is the hot button.
No, I just mean like, if I have a fist on the top of my, like, I'd have to have a fist. And
yeah. No, well, that's the interesting part about it. Is like, if we envision this thing as like a box with like a punching glove in it, and everyone else, like, you input your special code so people can just have access to it and be like, okay, activate Matt's punch and then engage, and then it's like bam, and I'm like, why would I buy that box? But That's the thing. It would have to be some government decree where everyone has to have one in their house, and it's like, then a loudspeaker would go on, report to the punching bag. I'm like, okay, fine, and then you show up and then you just get clocked.
Fair enough. All right, well, last question for you. So, as I mentioned, there are a lot of people who would love to be in a position such as yours. So what advice do you have for someone who's aspiring to do something similar or getting started or so on?
I will quote the very wise Tommy Wiseau when he was asked by somebody that, I want to get into writing. How do I start? And his response was start. Like, that was it. It's like, it's as simple as that. Yet I understand that it's very complex, because in order to get into this business, you have to understand that it is not very rewarding financially. I hate to break it to everybody that might think that I'm rich and famous. That is not true at all. This is absolutely not true at all. Nothing is ever guaranteed. Your income, your opportunities, the only thing that you need to guarantee is your passion for it. because I would not have put in the 2,000 to 3,000 hours of content that earned me $0 fat dollars if I didn't absolutely love what I was doing. Think about the job you were, like any type of job that you might not like. Would you do it for free? No, you wouldn't. Would you do it for, like nearly free? Probably not. That's part of the aspect. I did all those hours of streaming and whatever because I really loved what I was doing, and I was doing it anyways. I was playing cards anyways. I wanted to broadcast anyways. That was kind of the difficult path, because it's very rare that you can jump into this business and immediately get recognized. You need to be humble. You need to understand that as unfair as it may seem, there are people who have some certain positions already locked up, but they too were in that position that you were. And it's not to say that you're not as good as them. It's just that they have already, they've already established themselves and built a relationship with a particular company. And that's the hardest part, is breaking in. And when I broke in, it was after streaming for God knows how long and honing my craft in that regard. And then you move through it. I would never discourage anybody to take part in this, but I always sort of pull the curtain back and say, it's going to take a long, long time of consistent effort and practice and reps and whatever for you to see any kind of growing opportunity. And it's tough. And that is the difficult part. So if you do not absolutely freaking love what you do, then you might need to reconsider, because you're not going to put out a YouTube video that's going to get 100,000 hits tomorrow. It might be in 2 years. It might be in 6 months. It might be in 10 years. It might never happen. Never happened to me, but at the same time, you got to be, if I didn't love what I do, I would have quit so long ago. I would have quit because I would be like, I would rather do something else I don't like for a lot more money. And that's the sheer reality of it, is that if you're not building this career on a solid foundation of passion for the industry and what you're getting into, then you are going to really hate your life for quite a long time.
Well, I think that's solid advice. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. What are we? Oh man, like 40 minutes. Thanks so much. This is awesome. Also taking your time on Sunday, working around my family schedule, so there are no screaming children in the background. So before we exit, do you have any shout outs or anything else you want to reiterate your stuff?
I want to shout out yourself, because it's very important for people to understand that this community is built off of people like you who put content out there and don't, like I said, that aren't expecting to make money off of it. Like that's the reality of it. That this is coming from a position of passion for the community, for the game, for just your own enjoyment and the enjoyment of others. And I see, watching the scroll of all the names who support you. So this is another thing that I think is important to reiterate. And this is one of those crossroads that I approached when I was getting into the business, is that I got a very stern talking to from somebody I trust very much, who said two things that when I was really worried about this business and my position, my place in it. And my complaint was, I'm like, I have only 30 people watching me. And what she told me was, yeah, imagine those 30 people were in a room with you, and they like you, they want to see you, they like your, like, that is a lot of people. And that's the important part, is that there are a lot of people out there, as small as you may seem, that count on you for recreation, for escape, for joy. So I want to shout you out for putting out content that people like, people enjoy, because it's important for the fabric of this community.
That's a pretty good pep talk, actually, with conceptualize your 100 viewers. That's actually a pretty good point.
I remember this because this is like one of my best friends in the whole wide world. And I was one of her bridesmaids. That is a true story. I was a bridesmaid.
But never the bride, Flake.
I was never the bride, but she's like my therapist in that regard, where when I was getting into content creation, I toiled away for a year and a half, and I was never getting opportunities. And I just said, I'm like, maybe I'll just give up. I mean, like, well, who cares? I have like 30 viewers. And that's what she said. She said, imagine those 30 viewers are right here in front of you. And they watch you every day. and they tune into you and they appreciate you. I'm like, does that make it a little bit more important to you of what you can do? And that really just kind of gave my head a shake. And that's an important way to think about it, because a lot of people get discouraged by numbers. It's a very cutthroat business, and you put on a stream, and the first thing that happens when you shut that stream off is Twitch sends you like a report card and says, this is how many people watched you, this is your peak, this is your average, this is your whatever. It is incredibly aggressive against your mental health. But do not think of these people as just sheer metrics and data. They are humans, they're souls out there that are watching your content, and I cannot stress that enough. It's important that to not feel as small as you may feel, because there are people out there who love and appreciate what you do.
That's awesome. I really like that. All right, well, again, I want to thank you for coming. Again, for those of you who don't know who he is, which hopefully you do at this point, and most of you did already, you can find him over at 983 Media on the YouTubes. We do have at Watch Flake up here. There we got it. On the Twitters and all the other places that you kids do your internets and all that. But thank you very much, sir, for coming. And you got to say it with me. Go Commando.
Go Commando. I missed my mark. I'm so sorry.
It was awesome. Dude, this is great.